Welcome to Optimal Outcome Precepting, Session 3, Designing a Structured, Well-Organized Learning Experience. When I was the Director of Experiential Education at Palm Beach Atlantic University and also at Wingate University during the early 2000s, one of the most frequent complaints I received from preceptors was that it was difficult to keep track of what the students should be doing every day, and it was somewhat draining to be constantly trying to figure out how to keep the students occupied. Interestingly enough, one of the complaints I received from students quite regularly was that they felt as though they didn't know what they were supposed to be doing at all times, or as if they're in the way in the pharmacy department or in the hospital. We can alleviate such concerns by simply planning a well-organized experience and building structure into that experience such that the students always know what they're expected to do, and the preceptor doesn't have to spend a lot of time thinking about what the students should be doing day in and day out. Keep in mind that a TMU rotation is 4 weeks, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So there's a lot of time that the student spends at the hospital, time that needs to be well planned so students know what they need to be doing. I'm Professor Daniel Brown. I'm also the Director of Faculty Development at Palm Beach Atlantic University, which is in West Palm Beach, Florida. You can see the chapel of the university on the slide at the left. Palm Beach Atlantic University is a Christian university. Our students are of many different religions and faith backgrounds, but all faculty are Christian. And we have a chapel, and students are required to attend chapel once a week. So you can see the DeSantis Family Chapel there on the left. The slide on the right, you can see the main mall down the center of campus, the older part of campus. At the end of that mall is the administration building, and just to the left of the mall in the front is the student center. But you can see we have a very beautiful campus. Flashback to the original session on precepting, 6 steps to becoming a super preceptor, which provided a rough overview of how to plan a rotation. Now we have these 5 sessions, of which this is session 3, to explain in more detail what preceptors should be doing. In the 6 steps to becoming a super preceptor, we'll be focusing on steps 4 and 5 today to uphold a clear set of rules, boundaries, and expectations for students, and also to create a self-sustaining structural framework for students to follow and for the preceptor to follow during the rotation. Everything always starts with learning outcomes. Now, we've already covered how the methods and the content of a rotation should flow directly from the learning outcomes as the target of what students should learn as a result of their rotational experience. Today we're going to be talking about the assimilation of the methods and the content and also the assessments practices that we talked about yesterday. It's important for the methods, the assessment, and the content to all flow together smoothly and be in alignment toward achieving the learning outcomes. The best way to accomplish that, a nice smooth flow of learning during the rotation, is to plan a well-organized experience and build a lot of structure into it. So there's consistency from rotation to rotation and from student to student. Our first learning principle for this session is experiential training should be like well-planned and organized basketball practice. John Wooden, one of the great basketball coaches of all time from UCLA, won 10 national championships in 12 years from 1964 to 1972, was quoted as saying, "Failure to prepare is preparing to fail." John Wooden was noted for being meticulous in planning the practices of his players. He planned out every minute and executed his practices with precision. His idea was he wanted the time to be well spent so that his players would get as much out of the practice as possible. The same rationale applies to operating a pharmacy practice rotation. The preceptor should plan the rotation well enough that the student's time is well spent and they achieve the learning outcomes to the greatest extent possible. The training needs to be efficient, consistent, and productive. Efficient from the standpoint of the preceptor, because let's face it, preceptors have other responsibilities. Training students is just one aspect of their roles at the hospital. So we want to be as efficient as possible so preceptors don't consume too much time with students and can still fulfill their other responsibilities. We want it to be consistent so students get a stable learning experience that they can count on from time to time. And we want it to be productive so students get as much out of those 4 weeks as possible. Our next experiential learning principle is that structure provides efficiency and consistency. What we mean by this is that structure helps students to know what to expect and to stay on track. Structure tells students what they should be doing at any given time during a specific day of the rotation, and it helps them stay on track to accomplish the assignments and the activities that they've been assigned. It also decreases demands on the preceptor. If there's a lot of structure built into the rotation, documentation has been made, instructions are provided, the students know what they have to do without constantly asking the preceptor to provide guidance. It makes things much more efficient, so the preceptor can stay on top of what the students are doing and provide adequate guidance while still fulfilling his or her responsibilities as a pharmacist in the hospital. It improves documentation and supports assessment. If we have forms that students are expected to fill out as they're engaged in patient monitoring or other types of activities, it provides a record of what students are doing. This record can then be reviewed by the preceptor to evaluate how well the students are keeping up with the expectations of the rotation. It also provides for formatting the assessment that will take place so that when preceptors assess student performance, they have a standardized form that provides objectivity and consistency in grading. It minimizes misunderstandings between the preceptor and the student. If the expectations of the students and the rules and regulations of the rotation are in print that can be provided to students in advance, students can be held accountable, and there will be less miscommunication where there's conflict between the preceptor and the student because the student doesn't understand exactly what the expectations of the preceptor were. In this case, if everything's in writing, there's no misunderstanding, and students can be held accountable with much less conflict. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it produces better outcomes. A well-organized, structured rotation guides the students systematically toward what they need to achieve and makes it easier for the preceptor to objectively and fairly assess the student performance and to provide the needed corrective guidance as to how students need to improve. So the end result is better achievement of the learning outcomes by the students. Our next experiential learning principle is to manage critical information as simply and as accurately as possible. Monitoring forms make it much easier for the student to get in the swing of how they should monitor patients. The sequence of monitoring is something that the students will pick up over time. As they're constantly filling out the forms with a certain sequence, that sequence will become natural as students continue to use the form. And it also provides adequate documentation of what the students are doing on a daily basis that the preceptor can easily review. Grading and assessment forms make it easier for the preceptor to grade the student consistently and objectively. And it also guides the students as to how they will be evaluated. So when they're preparing assignments or they're engaged in activities, they know exactly what the criteria are for how they will be evaluated. It provides opportunities to give students instructions in writing, which saves a lot of time. It's much easier for the preceptor to hand a student a set of instructions, considering the fact that there may be multiple students on the rotation, and the preceptor is going to have a new set of students every 4 weeks. If the instructions are printed in writing, the preceptor can simply give those instructions to the student, and then the student can read them for him or herself. There's less time that the preceptor has to spend verbally giving instructions to the students, and less miscommunication that may result, because we know what can happen during verbal instructions. Oftentimes, many of them are misinterpreted or forgotten. A rotation calendar or schedule provides the student with a clear understanding of what they need to be doing every day, and it also relieves the preceptor of the burden of having to determine what students need to do on a daily basis. It's already determined at the start of the rotation and documented on a schedule or a calendar. And rules and policies can be put in print so students know exactly what the expectations are, what time they need to show up, what kind of appearance or attire restrictions may be placed on them. All such policies and procedures can be put in writing so the students can be held accountable, and the preceptor has less burden to educate the students about those policies.